Good evening. Welcome to Fantasy Brain Games. This is Andrew Hines along with Blake Ponson. Had a lot of interesting things happen last Sunday. If you remember, we are the fantasy guys. We're going over fantasy football. We'll also do basketball and baseball when those seasons get here. Blake, off top of your head, anything that just shot out to you last Sunday?
Well, the first thing that everybody's probably thinking about is the Giants currently do not have.
Any receivers whatsoever?
Yes, I think they still have Sterling Shepard, but
Yeah, maybe. He was in a walking boot today. They also have Evan Ingram. He may be a possible pickup. Let's jump right into it. Have a lot of action to get to. What's our first game we're going to go over, Blake?
the first game we're going to go over is the Jets at the Browns. The Jets ended up winning this game 17-14. The keynote that I had for this game was Kevin Hogan did come in for Deshaun Kaiser. They did bench Kaiser after he started off 8 for 16. And Hogan actually surprised people in putting up 16 for 19 passing with 194 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he did throw 1 pick. But he had he had a pretty solid game coming in after Kaiser.
Yeah, and I think another thing to note is the Jets running backs. The two guys, you had Bilal Powell and Elijah McGuire. They kind of impressed us. Another thing on running backs in this game was Duke Johnson. He actually put up 17.3 fantasy points, and he was impressive in the passing game, not so much as in the rushing game.
Yes, Duke Johnson's still a solid PPR play. He's involved in the run game a little bit, not as much as Crowell, but he's definitely still involved in the passing game.
Yes, sir. And like you already noted was the change in quarterback for the Browns. I was actually very impressed by the backup. Bilal Powell only had 7.3 fantasy points. So that's a thing to keep your eye on. Let's see, how many touches did he have? Like 2?
I don't have the exact number of touches, but I think he had it was 1 or 2.
Yeah, he had 2 touches all game. Was not a very good game for him.
He did leave with an injury, so
yeah, that's true.
McGuire did come in and finish out the rest of the game.
Okay. Anything else to note from this game?
One thing you already mentioned, ASJ. I still think he's a solid pickup for people thin at tight end. He's going to continue to be probably one of the leading pass catchers on that team, and Eli McGuire could be one of your top waiver wire pickups for somebody needing a running back. If Bilal Powell does not play this next week, I expect McGuire to see a pretty good workload, considering he'll be the only,
running back there.
Yes.
And just to finish off that note, McGuire ended with 11 touches for 20 yards and 2 receptions for 10 yards. So you might see that production go up a little bit next week. What's our next game?
The next game, we saw the Panthers beat the Lions 27-24. This game was the Panthers were up most of the game, and the Lions did make a pretty good run at the end in order to make it close. Another big game for Cam Newton after he started off struggling out of the gates. Finishes with 355 yards and 3 touchdowns. Again, one thing I'll note about Newton is he doesn't seem to have the run game that he's had the last couple years since he's come into the league.
And if you remember from last year, Cam had all that problems with getting hit and referees not calling the way they do for your Tom Brady's and stuff like that. So that may be part of the reason, but still and yet that's affecting his rushing game. He was the number 5 quarterback this week. So that he may be back. I'm not completely buying it yet, but it's one thing to keep your eye on. Christian McCaffrey, did he do anything special this week?
No, nothing special for McCaffrey. Had a few receptions. Still not really involved in the run game like a lot of people expected when they drafted him with a high draft price. Jonathan Stewart continues to see majority of the carries, but McCaffrey still is involved in the receiving game a little bit.
Now, I would argue that McCaffrey's still the better fantasy running back out of the backfield there. I mean, because of the catches that he gets and the higher amount of catches that he gets than Jonathan Stewart. I mean, McCaffrey did have almost 15 fantasy points last week. So I think that makes him a weapon. Anything else to add there?
thing to note is Devin Funchess continues to see a good bit of targets. They finished this game with 7 receptions or 53 yards and a touchdown. So
That's a good point.
with Greg Olson out, he is the big target in the end zone Cam Newton likes to look for. And the last note about the Lions, I will say Abdullah had a decent game for his opportunity that he had. I also think that he's going to continue to be a solid running back because the Lions are playing catch-up most of the game, so therefore they went with the pass catcher Riddick instead of, consistently running the ball with Abdullah. So.
Yeah, and Devin Funchess, I think, was a good point. He did have 18.3 points this week, and he's been doing that more consistently every week. What's the next game we got on the docket?
The next game is one game I enjoyed seeing. The outcome to this game was the 49ers losing to the Colts by a score of 23-26. And my big call, one of the big calls for last week was Brian Hoyer. I said he was a solid streaming option at quarterback, and he finished with 353 yards and 2 touchdowns. So
he did make you look like a smart man. He was the 7th best quarterback in the league this week. He ended with 22.1 points fantasy-wise.
Yes, I enjoyed seeing that because I picked him up in one of my leagues and I put him in a starting spot. So I enjoyed his 22 points he got.
Now another guy we noted on in the last show was Frank Gore, and I believe he had a decent game. He picked up 11.6 points. So if you were down a running back last week and you happened to pick him up, it's not a bad pickup, not a bad 11.6. The other guy, who else did we like in that game?
Marlon Mack did come in for Frank Gore some, and he finished with 9 rushes for 91 yards. So I still think if something were to happen to Frank Gore, Marlon Mack would be a very solid running back to fill in for him. So the production wouldn't fall off. So if you want to pick him up and maybe as like a stash or somebody owns Frank Gore, you could pick him up as a handcuff. And the last thing to note about this game is George Kittle did get 7 receptions for 83 yards and a touchdown. I wouldn't look too much into this.
I think we agree on this guy. I think I'm not sold on George Kittle yet. One game, good game. Anybody can go off for one game though. So I want to see a little more out of him before I try to start selling him to everyone else.
Yes.
Next game, what do we got?
The next game, nothing really exciting happened out of this game. The Titans lost to the Dolphins 10-16. The only note I have here was Jarvis Landry did have a decent fantasy game with 5 receptions or 44 yards and a touchdown. So seeing him get in the end zone was a good sign.
I think the most interesting thing out of this whole game is that Mariota did not play, which hurt the whole offense, and so almost nobody got real productive points on that side. I don't think even Delaney Walker had a really good game. What's our next game, Ponson?
The next game, the Bills lose to the Bengals 16-20. AJ Green kind of shocked me personally, finishing with 7 receptions for 189 yards and a touchdown. The Bills could not stop him in this case. But one note of this game that I liked seeing was Mixon still continues to be the lead back in that situation. He finished with 15 carries for 51 yards, and he got his first touchdown of the year, so that's good.
Yeah, you seem to like Joe Mixon a lot. I'm not as sold on Joe Mixon. I think he was still not even in the top 20 on running backs last week, but he did seem to get more touches than everyone else. So I would say if you want to pick him up, if he's on a waiver wire, you might do that, but I wouldn't go out of my way to trade for him or anything like that. A guy that people seem to be raving about last week to might want to pick up was Tyler Kroft. Not a very big game for him, though. Only 7.8 fantasy points. So before we go crazy on him, I would say not yet.
Yes, and the one thing about Kroft is as long as Eifert is out, then people who are thin at tight end and they might need somebody. I'm like you. I'm not as sold on Kroft because if Eifert comes back, Eifert's going to be the lead tight end there and receive. He is one of Andy Dalton's preferred targets in the end zone. So
And they still got another guy named A.J. Green to throw at.
Yes.
So I think that's an important thing to note. Anything else interesting on this other than the absence of Charles Clay?
Yes, Charles Clay did leave with an injury. He will be out for a couple weeks to have a scope on his knee. LaShawn McCoy is going to be the Bills' leading receiver and their leading rusher, so
He's their leading everything. I think he's going to even lead in pass yards by the end of the season.
it wouldn't surprise me. But I don't. The Bills' offense, I don't look for them to have any fantasy relevance other than maybe Tyrod as a quarterback streamer
Or LaShawn.
and LaShawn being probably RB1, RB2 option.
Yeah, I agree with that. Anything else on this game to note before we move on?
No, nothing else. So the next game, the Chargers beat the Giants 27-22, and this was the game where we saw a lot happen in terms of injuries and some fantasy relevant plays.
And Melvin Gordon, man among boys. He had 34.3 fantasy points to lead all rushers, all running backs. He was number one last week. Melvin Gordon, I believe you had him, right?
Yes, I have him I think I have him in the league we're in together. And so I enjoyed it. It was kind of odd to see him get 2 receiving touchdowns rather than 2 rushing touchdowns, but hey, we'll take the 6 points, yes.
20 rushes on 105 yards, that's also good signs because there's other big names in the leagues that were rushing for 29 for 107, 29 for 117 that you like to see the efficiency. What else out of this game did we like?
Other than Melvin Gordon, nothing really else happened on the Chargers side.
What did Keenan Allen do? Did he do anything?
Keenan Allen, I do not have a note for him.
Yeah, I don't think he did anything special, so I might watch out for that. People have been saying, I've been hearing, watch out for Keenan Allen. He's kind of a blessing in disguise so far, but don't be too sold on him. And I don't think he did anything special at all.
He finished with 4 receptions for 64 yards. I mean, he didn't ruin your fantasy day, but I mean, he didn't go off like his normal self usually does.
He didn't help matters. Anything else interesting out of this game, or can we move on?
Well, the big note is going to be the injuries to the Giants wide receivers.
Yeah.
So we know Odell and Brandon Marshall are now done for the year. So that leaves Sterling Shepard, who also suffered an injury.
Yep. Who may miss some time. He may not. We don't know that yet. I would keep an eye on that because if he's back, maybe start him this week. I'm not going to tell you to, though, because they are playing the Broncos.
Yes, I'm not going to touch anybody on the Giants when they're playing Denver. And plus, you would expect Evan Ingram to, receive a big workload as far as targets go.
Oh, yeah.
But as far as the Giants' offense being even worse, we saw how bad they were week 1 without Odell. So now they're about to be without Odell for the rest of the year. So I'm not a huge fan of anybody on the Giants the rest of the year.
Yeah, I'm not. I think I'm selling all my Giants players too. I've been trying to sell Brandon Marshall lately anyway. What else to note on this other than injuries and Melvin Gordon?
I don't think that's all the notes I have.
All right, what's our next game?
Next game is going to be the Jaguars beating the Steelers 30-9. This was a very interesting game.
Big Ben just demolished you if you started him.
Yes.
What was it, 5 INTs?
Yes, he finished 5 interceptions. He still finished 33 of 55, but he did have 5 interceptions, no touchdowns. So his volume alone still made Antonio Brown, have a good fantasy day with finishing 10 for 157, I think.
Not only Antonio Brown, but also the running back, Le'Veon Bell. Most of his points came off receptions. I think he still ended with like 19 points, and most of it was receiving yards.
Yes, Bell and Antonio Brown did account for 20 receptions out of Ben Roethlisberger's 33 completions. So you can obviously see where his 2 favorite targets are.
Yeah, Le'Veon Bell ended with 19.3 points, 10 receptions on 46 yards, or 46 yards on 10 receptions, rather, and had 15 touches for 47 rushing yards. So, even when Le'Veon Bell's team is getting blown out, he still is productive, which I think is important to note. Let's see, and then you already noted on Antonio Brown. What else out of this game came as a big surprise or hit you in the face other than, well, go ahead and tell me a little bit about Leonard Fournette last week.
Leonard Fournette did have a very fantastic game. Finished with 181 yards on 28 carries. Did get in the end zone twice. So that made him one of the top running back options for the week. The one thing I would note about that is he did have 90 of those 181 yards on his 90-yard touchdown run toward the end of the game. So
yeah, he had 31.4 fantasy points, and let's see, 16 of them came on one play with like 2 minutes left. So, great, awesome thing for Leonard Fournette owners, but be careful not to rely on that 31-point production every week, because if it wasn't for that one play with 2 minutes left and all of the Steelers players already checked out, he doesn't have that game. So be careful to rely on that.
Yeah, so, and then my last note for this game is going to be I said in our breakdown that I wasn't a huge fan of starting Big Ben against the Jaguars, and this game just kind of cemented the fact that I'm not a huge fan of starting quarterbacks against the Jaguars, because they do seem to shut down the pass game. Now they didn't completely shut it down, because we saw Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell still have solid days for those two. But as far as quarterbacks go, I don't think the quarterbacks are going to be able to put up the big numbers that they're...
Very careful on starting a fantasy quarterback against the Jaguars, as we saw week 1 with the Texans. Really, who's had success against the Jaguars so far this year? Is anyone?
I don't think... Nobody's had a fantastic day, because going into the week, I think they've only allowed like 6 or 7 points to quarterbacks.
Well, didn't Drew Brees play the Jaguars? Or was that the Panthers?
The Panthers... Ooh, I couldn't tell you.
It was one of them. I think Drew Brees played against Jaguars and played pretty well. Other than that, though, I'd be careful in starting quarterbacks against Jaguars defenses. So, other than that, nothing really else to note on this game that I can think of. You think of anything else?
Nothing else. So we can go ahead and move on to the Cardinals-Eagles game, where the Eagles beat the Cardinals 34-7. Carson Wentz has a very good day with 304 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, did throw 1 pick. He did spread around his touchdowns, as we saw Nelson Aguilar, 93 yards and a touchdown. Torrey Smith, who I think we both agreed on, he could sneak past the defense and get a touchdown. He did get in the end zone.
Zach Ertz picked up 6 receptions, 61 yards. I've loved Zach Ertz all year. Other than that, let's see, Aguilar, Ertz, and who's the other guy?
Trey Burton.
Received
the 4th touchdown.
Yeah, big games for those 4 guys, but like you said, we did hint at the receiver. What was his name?
Alshon Jeffrey being shadowed by Patrick Peterson. Peterson again shows that he is capable of not completely shutting down, but he does keep number 1 receivers in check whenever he covers them.
Yeah, so be careful against that guy. Other than that, Torrey Smith, big game, Zach Ertz. Anything happened for the Cardinals at all other than picking up Adrian Peterson today? Anything else happened for them? I think Andre Ellington had a decent game, but not a great game. Receiving-wise.
Yes, Andre Ellington's still going to be used as the receiving running back. So I assume Adrian Peterson will probably, take the role of the first and second down running back. But then I expect Ellington to continue to see his high volume of targets. So we will see how Peterson fits in this offense.
Alrighty. Anything else to note?
No, nothing else for this game.
Okay, what do we got next, Panson?
The next game is going to be the Seahawks beating the Rams 16-10.
Alrighty.
This game, we know the Seattle running back situation is a mess. So, honestly, me personally, I'm not going to trust any running back in that situation.
I think you're spot on.
Jimmy Graham, still a solid tight end, only gets 37 yards, but he does get in the end zone and adds 6 receptions. So he was a as low scoring as tight ends have been this year. That was a good day if you had Jimmy Graham.
And for Todd Gurley owners, I'm sorry, he did not have a good day. What do you have, like 14 rushes for 43 yards, and he only picked up 5 fantasy points. So for all you Todd Gurley owners, don't freak out yet. He's going to be fine. He just had one bad day, like we all do every now and then.
Yes, and we know Seattle has a very good defense, so I don't want to say it was expected that he has a bad game, but it's no surprise.
Not surprising, yeah.
It's no surprise that Seattle, can stop the run game.
Yeah, absolutely. What else to note? Maybe out of receivers, Doug Baldwin. Did he do anything this week?
No, I think Doug Baldwin had a
very mediocre game, I think.
Yes.
Anything else? Did any receivers have a very good game this week?
The 49ers, Tyler Higbee.
Okay.
He did 4 receptions, 98 yards. I wouldn't look into a whole lot of that just because Jared Goff, I would say he's rather good at spreading the ball around. Even though we saw Sammy Watkins, 0 fantasy points, doesn't catch one ball for any yards. So
I've never trusted Sammy Watkins since he came into the league. A note on Doug Baldwin, his final line was 4 receptions for 37 yards. He only had 7.7 fantasy points. So I'm not saying freak out, but if you are a Doug Baldwin owner, maybe it's time to maybe fill his spot with someone else but not drop him. Anything else to note on this game?
No, nothing else to note. We can go ahead and move on to the Ravens beating the Raiders by a score of 30-17.
And you were talking about Javoris Allen pre-show and how much you liked him and how you're starting to believe in him, and I think you're making me a believer too, and tell everybody why.
Yes, I just think from what we see is Javoris Allen receives 21 of the carries compared to Alex Collins only getting 12, along with Allen getting 21 carries, and he turned that into 73 yards. He does receive 4 receptions
and 12 yards. So that's 5 points just in the receiving game, and then he gets 9 points and otherwise, and a touchdown.
Yes, he did get in the end zone this game. So I think going forward, Allen is going to be my preferred back for the Ravens. I still think, especially as they like to use him as the pass catcher, so that also helps if he's also getting a good amount of the carries.
Yeah, and maybe even if you don't have a spot for him in your lineup as a flex or a RB2, maybe pick him up, stash him, see if he breaks out this season. If you're wondering who Javoris Allen is, they also call him Buck Allen. We had that discussion before the show, actually. Anything else you got about maybe the running situation, or I know there was a pass catcher in this game that had
Yes, Mike Wallace finishes with 133 yards receiving, only on 3 catches. So
that's crazy, isn't it?
It's not like he just received a massive amount of targets. He got a lot of receptions. So I wouldn't look a whole lot into Mike Wallace. He has struggled early on this year for the first 4 weeks. So
what's crazy to me about the 3 receptions for 133 yards, he only had 3 targets, and he didn't get any touchdowns.
Mm-mm.
So he had 3 big plays where he didn't make it to the end zone. That's crazy.
Yeah, so going forward, I would keep an eye on him. I assume a lot of people probably dropped him from their league because he was not receiving any targets, maybe getting 1 catch a week, if that.
Yeah.
So and the last note we can make about this game is Amari Cooper continues to struggle and put up 1 catch for 3 yards.
You're telling me I've got him on my team and I'm ready to trade him for cheap. Like, I don't even think I even want anything back in return except for maybe $1. I'm over that guy. Michael Crabtree, he do anything special this week, or did he just have a Michael Crabtree week where it was just kind of mediocre? Let's see. I don't see where he did anything, so I would say Michael Crabtree was very mediocre this week. Shout out to Richard Sherman. What do we got next?
The next game is going to be one of the shootouts this week, which ended up the Packers beating the Cowboys 35-31. We saw Aaron Rodgers be Aaron Rodgers at the end of the game, throwing an absolute dime.
They're going to have to rename Jerry World to South Lambeau. they go in there and they just dominate. But interesting note, Dak Prescott was the number 2 QB in all of fantasy football this week. So it's not like people were wrong when they told you to play Dak Prescott on your fantasy team. They may have just been wrong to say, hey, Dak Prescott's going to win this game. Anything else rushing-wise that you want to note?
Rushing-wise, Zeke did do normal Zeke things with 29 carries and 117 yards, I believe.
Yeah.
On the other side of the ball, Aaron Jones, who is filling in for Ty Montgomery, 19 rushes for 125 yards and 1 touchdown. So going forward, if Ty Montgomery does not play, I would say Aaron Jones.
I tell you what, and what that does for the Green Bay team is Aaron Jones allows Ty Montgomery to take a little more time off. So over the next couple weeks, I'm looking, if Aaron Jones is still on your waiver wire, your fantasy league is doing something wrong, and you need to have him. Mm-hmm. But if he's not, I'm not going to sit here and tell you to go out and make a big trade for him, because I do think when Ty Montgomery comes back, you're going to see a little bit of a decrease in production. Anything else to note on in this game other than Devontae Adams was healthy?
Yes, Devontae Adams did play, and he played rather well, getting 66 yards on 7 catches and scored twice. So him coming off the concussion scare and then him being able to play like he did, that was a very good sign for Devontae Adams going forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anything else?
No, nothing else for this game.
All right, what do we got next?
The next game, we had the Chiefs on Sunday night beating the Texans 34, or the Chiefs scored 42. They beat the Texans 42-34.
You had to go there, didn't you? You had to go there. Big thing to note for me and all Texans fans, Deshaun Watson, number 1 fantasy player this week. 5 throwing touchdowns, 261 yards, 3 rushes for 31 yards, and a 2-point conversion. So if Deshaun is still unowned in your league, you're doing something wrong. Go pick him up. I mean, even if you don't start him right away, pick him up. What else would you like to note from this week in that game?
So one thing to note in this game, Kareem Hunt did finish with 107 yards on the ground. Charkandrick West did take away 2 of his touchdowns. So that was very upsetting for Kareem Hunt owners, me being one of them.
Fun note about Charkandrick West, he actually scored more fantasy points than Kareem Hunt. I'm starting to think Kareem who? But, it's just me.
Yes, Alex Smith continues to still be a top quarterback option.
Yep.
With that, Travis Kelce did get 98 yards on 8 receptions. And the last thing I have to note about this game was J.J. Watt we saw him go down with the injury, so he is now done for the year, unfortunately.
He's out for the year again. Whitney Merciless goes down. Big hit. He's not like a small guy in that defense. That's major. One other thing to note, DeAndre Hopkins had 3 touchdowns on 4 receptions and 52 yards. But he was targeted 12 times. But 3 touchdowns, that's a big deal. He ended with 27.2 total fantasy points to be second among all receivers, second only to A.J. Green. Another thing I wanted to note, if you're looking for a kicker, this Butker kid was awesome. He had 21 fantasy points as a kicker. He was 3 for 3 from 40 plus and 2 for 2, 1 to 39. So if you're looking for a kicker, if your kicker's got a bye next week or something like that, I'm looking to pick up Harrison Butker of the Chiefs. Anything else for you this week on that game?
No, nothing else for that game.
Okay, what do we have on Monday Night Football?
Monday Night Football, we saw the Vikings beat the Bears 20-17. And me personally, I was in one of my fantasy leagues. The guy I was playing had Jared McKinnon.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Going on Monday night. I was up by 28 points, and I also had the Vikings defense. So my whole thought going through the day Monday was, do I sit the Vikings defense or do I go ahead and play them? So I did end up playing them because I thought, well,
it's the Chicago Bears and they're starting a rookie quarterback. You got to play them. And they had to get you, 8-9 points?
Yeah, they did end up with 12 points. Now, McKinnon ends up with 31. So
now, in standard PPR, he had 26.6.
Yes,
So
I think in our league he did get some yardage bonuses. So
Yeah. So in a standard PPR, if he's in a league that you're in, he only had 26.6, and I say only, he was number 3 back in all of football. So if Jerick McKinnon's available in your league, definite pickup. Maybe even go and trade for him. I mean, that's just an option for me.
yes, we also saw Kyle Rudolph receive 6 receptions for 45 yards and a touchdown. So he still proves to be a good target for Case Keenum. And on the other side of the ball for the Bears, I did like what I saw from Mitchell Trubisky in his first start on primetime against a very good defense in the Minnesota Vikings. So
Now, for me, Mitchell Trubisky does look like a very good quarterback. Fantasy-wise, not yet. Although he did face a very good Vikings defense, I think fantasy-wise, we're not looking to pick up Mitchell Trubisky yet. If he starts going off and showing you other things, maybe so. But as of right now, I'm not picking up Mitchell Trubisky.
yeah, I agree with that. He's in NFL quarterback form, but he's not to the point of fantasy quarterback yet. So
Tight end wise, one thing to note for me was Zach Miller. I tried to tell you last week that Zach Miller has impressed me, and Mitchell Trubisky looked to be looking for Zach Miller a lot last game. Let me see if I can find his targets real quick. Let's see, Zach Miller, 3 catches, 39 yards, 1 touchdown, 7 targets. That's not a bad number. So I think if you're hurting, if you're thin at, tight end, I would look for Austin Seferian-Jenkins, and then I'm looking for Zach Miller. Other than that, anything else to note from this game, major to you?
the last thing to note is Stephon Diggs did go down with an injury. Still not quite sure. I think he is questionable as far as going forward this week. But if he does not go in week 6, I would expect Adam Thielen to
Pick up
receive a pretty good workload and definitely be an upgrade without Diggs in the lineup. So
Absolutely.
keep a note on that.
Yeah, I like to hear that. As far as anything else overall, anything else we want to note about injuries, other than Big Ben just looking awful? Anything else that we got left? Are we ready to send off?
No, I think that's about it. I don't have any more notes here.
All right. Well, thank you for being with us. We will see you next time. I'm Andrew Hines. That's Blake Ponson. We love you. We'll see you next week.